Hi, Grandma here with a true story about a whale named Ibis, written by John Himmelman. Deep in a bay off the coast of an old fishing village lived a pod of humpback whales. One of the whales was a little calf named Ibis. Ibis was curious about everything in the sea. One day, she and her friend Blizzard went out swimming. They saw many kinds of fish. The most interesting were the starfish. Ibis liked to look at them. There was something about their shape that made her feel good. As Ibis and Blizzard were drifting over a reef, they heard a strange humming noise. The two calves looked up to see something large and dark pass overhead. It was as big as a whale, but it wasn't a whale. The calves were frightened. They'd never seen a boat before. They swam back to their mothers. The next day, Ibis went back to the reef. It wasn't long before another boat came along. Again, Ibis was scared, but she was curious too. She forced herself to swim to the surface. In the cool, hazy air, she saw several faces watching her. They didn't look scary. In fact, they looked very friendly. Ibis liked them. In the months that followed, Ibis and her friends lost their fear of boats. Boats came in many sizes and shapes, and the people in them always seemed to enjoy seeing the little whales. As Ibis grew up, she learned more about the sea. She knew what kinds of sharks to avoid, what food was the tastiest, and best of all, where to find the most dazzling starfish. Ibis never got tired of looking at starfish. People and their boats became a part of her life. Whenever a boat passed overhead, she swam to the top to say hello. One evening, Ibis and Blizzard saw a school of fish swimming around the bottom of a boat. Maybe there was something good up there to eat. They went to find out. Suddenly, Ibis was caught in a fishing net. She fought to get free, but the more she struggled, the more tangled up she became. Finally, she broke loose, but part of the net was caught in her mouth and wrapped around her tail. Blizzard swam off to find help. Ibis was confused and hurt. She wanted to get away, far from people and their boats and their nets. Slowly and painfully, she made her way toward the deep ocean. Many weeks passed and Ibis grew very ill. The net in her mouth made it hard for her to eat, and every time she went to the surface for air, the net cut into her tail. But if she didn't get air every half hour, she would die. Winter was coming, and it was time for the whales to move to warmer waters. But Ibis felt too weak to make the long journey. Instead, she turned back toward the coast. It was so hard for her to swim, she could barely keep moving. Ibis was about to give up. Then she saw a familiar shape. It was Blizzard. Sorry about the dog. Blizzard saw that Ibis needed help. Gently, Blizzard pushed her to the surface so she could breathe. Suddenly, the water was filled with the sounds of boat engines. The whales saw two small rafts and a boat circling them. Blizzard and Ibis tried to get away fast, but Ibis wasn't quick enough. The boats rushed toward her before she could dive. The people in the boats began to attach large floats to the pieces of net that were hurting Ibis. Blizzard stayed nearby, circling the boats nervously. Because of the floats, Ibis couldn't dive. She began to panic, but she didn't have the strength to fight. When the boats came in closer, a person reached into the water. Ibis stared at the person's hand. The hand reminded her of something she loved very much. She began to feel better. Soon, many hands slipped into the water. Ibis felt them tugging at the lines of the net. Moments later, the lines fell away, and she was free. Ibis blew a big spout from her blowhole, as if to say, "Thank you, thank you." Then she dived deep into the water. For the first time in many weeks, she felt no pain. She felt wonderful. Blizzard joined her. Then the two whales popped back to the surface for one more look. The people were waving their starfish-shaped hands. Ibis knew the hands had helped her and that the people were still her friends. Soon Blizzard and Ibis were leaping and diving with the other whales, far away in the warm waters where they would spend the winter together. So I want to tell you about Ibis. In the back of the book it says, Ibis is a real humpback whale. I first saw her one October morning in 1985 when my family and I were aboard a whale watching ship off the coast of Provincetown, Massachusetts. The whale swam right up to the boat as if to welcome us to her part of the world, and we soon learned Ibis's story from a marine scientist on board. He told us that only a year before, Ibis had been caught in the strands of a fisherman's gill net. The scientist who studied the whales in the area found her fighting to surface for air. Several hours later, when she didn't come up, she was believed to have drowned. But shortly afterward, on Thanksgiving Day, a research boat from Provincetown Center set out to record whale songs. A member of the crew spotted two whales swimming together. One of the whales was trapped in the net, and it was Ibis. The crew rescued her by attaching floats to her. In this way, they could keep her at the surface so they could reach into the water to cut the strands. She was the first whale ever saved from entanglement. Most aren't so lucky. Countless whales have died over the past years after accidentally getting caught in gill nets. As I watched Ibis playing in the water around us, I could understand why those who knew her had fought so hard to save her, and I got the idea to write and illustrate my own version of her story for this book. Because of the successful rescue of Ibis, the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies has added an entanglement fund to their program. A portion of my profits for this book will go toward that fund. Thank you, Stormy Mayo, David Matilla, Carol Danton, Mark Gilmore, Mary Pratt, Sharon Pittman, and Charles Mayo Jr. for the precious life you saved. And thank you, Ibis, for bringing me a little closer to your world. That's from the author, John Himmelman. The end.